Russell, welcome into the back room.
Well, good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the biggest story in the country right now, which is the Charlie Kirk assassination. But first, I want to state unequivocally that committing murder to settle political or any differences is unacceptable. And while I strongly disagreed with Kirk's positions, he did not deserve to die. My late wife was brutally murdered back in 2006. So I have a hatred of murder and of murderers. So that's my position. But I want to
hmm
ask you, from the shooting itself to the reactions in the days following, what does it say about America right now?
Well, I used the word satanic when this first happened in a particular kind of way. And what I mean by that is there's a kind of unfiltered rage in American life that seems, on the one hand, really calculated. The way that our algorithms are trying to push us to the most violent and extreme sorts of reactions possible, but on the other hand, is senseless. I mean, if you think about political violence, it's not only immoral and unjust, as you said, it's also self-defeating.
Mhm.
And so I think about the kind of language that Jesus uses about this kind of violence that just continues in cycles. It's self-defeating, it's irrational, and I think I think there's a sense of dread among a lot of people who fear that we're on the brink of something really, really dark. And that's going to require all of us looking at who wants us to be animalistic and violent toward each other and to step back from that and say no.
And in the wake of his assassination, it seems like some folks really don't know where to put themselves, and others are bestowing accolades on him that a lot of people don't feel is
Mhm.
justified given his past. For example, Pastor Howard John Wesley of Alfred Street Baptist Church in D.C. this week has gone viral for his comments on the glossing over of the divisive and what many people call sexist, racist, homophobic, xenophobic rhetoric. He said, quote, "There is nowhere in the Bible where we are taught to honor evil, and how you die does not redeem how you've lived. You don't become a hero in death when you're a weapon of the enemy in life." Do you agree on any level with those words?
Well, I can just tell you how I view it, and not necessarily how anybody else ought to think through this. But I think there's a time and a season for everything, and I think one of the moments after a death, particularly after a death by murder, that ought to happen is a recognition of a human life beyond the sum of its political ideas or any other set of ideas. And so I think there's a moment for, at least for me, not to come in and to diagnose statements that were said in the past, either in terms of valorizing them or criticizing them,
Mhm.
but to say this is a human life, and that transcends all of that for right now.
Yeah. Well, there seems to have been a rush to judge, not just to place blame, but also to maybe rewrite history a little. And I guess the problem for others is that if that goes unaddressed, then that becomes the narrative, and then that
hmm
takes off. And you can look at the halls of Congress right now. There are Charlie Kirk posters all over the place, and there is a narrative being created. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. In a perfect world, there'd be some time for people to breathe, take a step back, and analyze and assess everything. But I guess that's not where we are today, unfortunately. Do you think it was a legit thing to fly government flags at half staff?
Well, I think that if I'm trying to impute to everybody wherever I can the best possible motives rather than the basest political motives, unless clearly indicated otherwise right now. And I think we did have a very um, public inflection point in American life that I think rattled everyone, almost everyone, regardless of where that person might be on the political spectrum. So, in that sense, an addressing of it in whatever way is appropriate, I don't object to that.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was at a NFL football game on Sunday, and there was an honor of Charlie Kirk and a moment of silence. And I looked around, and I specifically looked at people of color, uh, and they weren't engaging. And there was a lot of other people not engaging. And the takeaway from me was that, should the US government be doing something like that? Should private enterprise be doing something like that when it tends to alienate a lot of people who feel that they were the target of rhetoric that was not kind and even dangerous at times?
Yeah, but I think there's a way for leaders to talk about the fact that we're not here diagnosing the contents of somebody's statements. We're here saying this is not the kind of country we want to live in when people can be gunned down having debates and conversations. So I think of this kind of the way that Shirley Chisholm, the one of the first African American women elected to Congress, who was running for president in 1972, went to the hospital room of George Wallace when he was shot. Now, she certainly could not have been confused with
Right.
in any way agreeing with Wallace's demagogic rhetoric. I mean, she clearly was not that, but she recognized that there's something about the human
Hmm.
level that was important here, and there also is something important about saying to the rest of the country, "This is not the way we do this. This is
Hmm.
not the way we have these debates." I think that's important to say. I think one of the things that's going to happen is later. We're all going to kind of look back and say what were the right ways to recognize that, maybe what were some that didn't work. But for right now, I'm not. That's not what I'm really too worried about.
Yeah. You're referring, and rightly so, to an era that did have humanity. And we're in very short supply of that these days.
Yeah.
The heat in this country right now is at inferno levels. How do we turn down the temperature?
Well, I think one of the ways is by getting to a place of exhaustion that doesn't lead to cynicism. And that's what I worry about. It's clear that we're on our way to exhaustion because there's no way that a human limbic system can be put to these levels of constant vigilance and alert that is happening right now in a smartphone era, social media era, a polarized era, and not get to a point of exhaustion. Question is what comes after that? And what I think we have to watch for and make sure doesn't happen is the kind of cynicism that starts to simply expect this. And that's one of the things that I kind of worry about in an era like this, where a lot of things are are being made to feel normal that are not normal at all. That we would get to the point where that's simply what we expect. I
Hmm.
actually don't think that's going to happen. I really do think that we can see in American history uh, a sense of reacting to, seeing when an era has been bad for us, and a correcting for that, sometimes overcorrecting for it in some ways. Um, but cynicism, I think, is the deadliest thing we face right now.
You know, one of the things that's allowed us to go down the road, the path that you've talked about, is that we've never in history had such a divisive president. So it makes me and others wonder, how do we begin to achieve this critical goal when our elected leaders, including and especially President Trump, who heavily influences tens of millions of people, has really been espousing nothing but pretty divisive and dangerous rhetoric in the past week?
Well, I think one of the things that works against that is a sense of powerlessness that most people have right now who are not wanting to move in this direction. Um, that I think can be dangerous if we start to respond with a "What are you going to do?" shrug, and simply to move forward. I think instead there are all kinds of people who can recognize I can't really do anything about the country right now. But what I can do is not to conform myself to that in terms of my expectations. And those kinds of models actually do have tremendous power. I mean, I think of I'm a Mississippian. I grew up in Biloxi, Mississippi, and when I would see the older generation of people around me who dissented from the Jim Crow segregationist worldview that had been present there throughout the 20th century, almost all of them had one thing in common, the white people who did. Almost everything, almost all of them had in common that they had served in the United States military and had, while they were there, encountered a reality that they had been told could not exist. And simply experiencing and seeing that reality, even though it didn't do anything about Ross Barnett and Ole Miss and all of the things going on in Mississippi, it ultimately changed some of those people. And that I think is key. So in some ways, I think that a lot of us are paralyzed by the thought that we have that we ought to have a 7-point program as to how to reverse all of this. And that's not materializing anytime soon. But we can say
Mhm.
I'm not going to be that way.
You know, most of these deadly assassinations and attempted assassinations and mass shootings are committed by disenfranchised, disconnected, angry, radicalized young men.
Right.
What's happening with teenage boys and young men today? Why is there such a problem, and how do we begin to address that?
Well, I think there are a number of things. I mean, one of those things is there's not a structure of rites of passage to teach and to train boys and young men what does it mean to be a man. And when you don't have that, when you don't have this sense of what it means to be an honorable, not just person, but an honorable man, often what you end up with is simply a definition of manhood that's just raw, uh, brute strength and power. And then what happens is you have people um, who aren't able to find that kind of raw, brute power because it doesn't exist in human beings, and they start to retreat into a very dark place when you have multiple factors. I mean, there's always in all of these cases there are multiple factors going on and never just one. And I think the other part of it is we kind of are at a moment where we have the worst of both worlds. I mean, I think that one of the things that every wise society has always recognized is that a just society needs to call forward both the best of what it means to be an individual and the best of what it means to be a community. That we belong to each other, but we're not absorbed into a hive mind of each other. And that's, I mean, you can even see in the American founding, that was the aspiration was to attempt to have both of those things present in intention. And right now, in many cases, we have the worst of both worlds because we have people who are disconnected from genuine community and who are lonely and seeking connection, but who find an illusory community. They
Hmm.
find this sense of belonging with faceless, nameless people
Yeah.
online. That's a dangerous, dangerous combination.
Yeah, that's a great point. The more these young men retreat from actual society, they find their virtual community online, and that's when some really bad thoughts tend to go around. We've been hearing in the last week about radicalization. This one, this assassin was radicalized, or whatever. But there's some irony that I think is lost on a lot of people in that no one seems to be talking about how MAGA is the greatest example of radicalization in American history. I mean, if we really want to be honest and have an honest conversation about people becoming radicalized, all we got to do is look at up to half of this country right now.
Well, I think that one of the things that's dangerous right now is that um, we have a tendency to say, because the stakes are so high, that means that whatever side I'm on, whatever tribe I'm on, I've got to minimize and diminish the dangerous aspects of that in order to combat whoever the enemies are. I think that's a wrong way to go right now, to
Hmm.
say, well, let's measure where we have more radicalization and where we have more dangerous ideas. And I think instead we need to have grown up, mature people on the right who are calling out right wing radicalization, and grown up, mature people on the left who are calling out left wing radicalization, and recognizing that sometimes the way we can equivocate actually then can further the radicalization all around. And I just don't think that's a useful thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I am with you, but you and I are singing Kumbaya right now. I mean, it's just
No, I
not.
don't think we're singing Kumbaya, because I think the danger is um, this sense of um, a kind of irredeemable and extreme depravity, in which we say, because my opponents, whoever they are so far gone and are so thoroughly evil and beyond persuasion, then that means that desperate times call for desperate measures. And I don't want that in the people that I oppose, and I don't want that in me.
Yeah, on that I completely agree. But again, we're living in a landscape right now which is unprecedented,
Yeah.
and the temperature is incredibly high, and you just don't see what you and I would love to see happening. You don't see that happening. In fact, you see it getting worse, and that's the scary part.
Yeah, and I think that the self-fulfilling prophecy that we could do there is to conclude um, that it's only going to get worse. And that I think that causes us to yield to our darkest impulses all around.
Yeah. In keeping with having open and honest conversations, Kirk's assassination should not be viewed in a vacuum. There are people dying seemingly weekly in mass shootings, uh, gun violence, the kind of gun violence that does not exist in other Western countries. The statistics prove the correlation between these gun deaths and restrictive laws. So, what do you say to people who just, quite frankly, if I can be as blunt as possible, are just like, please, no more thoughts and prayers as the standard solution instead of sensible gun reform?
Well, I think you can have both of those things, and I think you also have to we have to recognize we're not going to solve this problem with utopianism either. And so I think sometimes there's a sense of, on the right, well, if we just get rid of video games, all of this goes away.
Right.
And there's sometimes a sense in some sectors of the left, well, let's just get rid of the guns and this all goes away. Well, yes, but you're not going to get rid of the guns in just by simply having a 51% majority
Right.
somewhere. So instead, what we have to do is to say, how can we how can we move toward this? So I think about, I mean, even in we in my community lived through the Covenant school shooting here. And some of those parents of children who had been killed, and some of the parents whose children survived, were advocating really reasonable red flag laws
Mhm.
and very incremental steps. They were vilified by
Mhm.
many people who were their opponents, but they didn't give up. And I think that they're continuing to move toward that. And I mean, one of the problems that we have with this issue, kind of like we do with immigration and some other questions, is that even when you have, I mean, a lot of times what will do is to look at polling data and say, well, we actually have an 85% majority who want this, or this, without recognizing, yeah, but the 15% who don't want anything are often those who have the most fervor and energy.
Mhm.
And so and I don't think it helps too that we're in a place where we have these siloed super majorities, um, where there actually is not even any, uh, there's not even an attempt to put issues on the table because there's no possibility at all that one is going to have to advocate for those things.
Yeah.
That I think has put us into a dangerous situation as well.
Let's talk about another big story in this country right now, which is the whole Jeffrey Epstein situation,
Hmm.
which, much to Trump's and congressional Republicans' frustration and dismay, is not going away. And to the contrary, seems like it's an even greater existential threat today to the president and his party. You wrote an op ed back in July titled, Why We Want to See the Epstein Files. So, why do we want to see these files? And even more so, why do we need to see these files?
Because I think we have an innate sense of justice and of a moral framework and a moral order that's more than just um, the will to power. And I think in this case, what we have seen over and over and over again in almost every segment of American life are institutions that are choosing institutional well-being and institutional safety, institutional self-protection over the people that they consider to be the most expendable. And usually, those people are those who are expected simply to go away.
Hmm.
And I think that we've seen that kind of predatory behavior, which is further empowered by the people who will say, just move on. And that the temptation is there to say, and I've seen this in a church setting also, which is to say, that it would be nice to try to move toward justice for the people who have been harmed, but the stakes are too high.
Right.
We've got this we've got missionaries we've got to support, so you need to be quiet. And then in the case here, well, we've got our political opponents are so powerful, so we don't have time to deal with this. Well, that's really a form of moral uh, of sacrificing human sacrifice at the moral
Hmm.
level.
Hmm.
These are expendable people who don't need to be listened to. And I think there's something in most people that even if they're not at the point of saying we've got to do, there's a sense of a nagging, uneasy conscience that that's not happening. And I think that's
Hmm.
one of the reasons why this hasn't gone away. Now, I'm not naive about that. I think one of the things that we have seen is that the American attention span is so fragmented and so low that almost anybody in any kind of a cover up or a scandal of any sort knows if we just wait this out, eventually people will forget about it and move on to the next thing.
Or even more so in the case of Trump, if we flood the zone with
Yeah.
distraction after distraction after distraction, they'll forget that even exists. But that's the interesting thing. That's not working this time. That's his special sauce usually, but it's not
Yeah.
working this time.
Yeah.
And you wrote that piece 2 months ago. How
hmm
surprised or even shocked are you that the full files have yet to be released and unredacted except for the victims' names and information?
Well, sadly, I'm not that surprised, and I think that's because I've kind of been in test run situations like this with institutions that are much less powerful than the United States government or the kind of I mean, if you think about, regardless of what's going on with Epstein, what we do know, even without the files, is that Epstein was in a company of very, very powerful and resourced people. Even if we don't know who they all are, we know that's the kind of world and ecosystem that he inhabited. Um, and so we're in a time right now where those people often find it very easy to evade justice.
Mhm.
So it doesn't entirely surprise me. What has surprised me though are the people who I might and again, this is just my having too low of expectations. There are some people that I might have expected to find some way to justify the keeping the Epstein files bound up, who haven't. I was surprised by that. I don't know how far that takes us, but so far.
The interesting thing is that we've seen this scandal bring people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ro Khanna
Yeah,
together at a
right.
press conference. I mean, who would have thought something like that could happen? So I want to ask you, what do you think this particular scandal, why has it aroused the ire of so many Americans, especially MAGA? Why is this the thing?
I think there are a couple things. I mean, I think one of those things is it's kind of like, I mean, there years and years and years ago, when I was part of a coalition of people who were, sort of across the political spectrum. We didn't agree on anything except for that one thing. There was somebody who had been working in this kind of area for a long time who said, I used to think that the coalitions were in service of the issue. And now, in many ways, I think the issue is in service of the coalition because often, if you can have people who are working together on something that has not yet been claimed by some sort of tribal identity, they actually can start to see we really do have more overlap in a lot of ways than we think we did. Now, the problem with that is there's almost nothing that right now has
Mhm.
not been uh, claimed by some sort of tribal identity. In a way, I just had a college student say to me yesterday, they had an assignment where what they had to do was to find a news article and to sort of contrast different ways that different media sources are talking about it, and how do you determine what's true. And the student said, I was trying to find something because I'm so tired of political division and argument. I was trying to find something that would not be in that realm, and there's nothing. So that's true. With Epstein, though, you had some people who were already talking about this and already thinking about this before they knew that it might implicate people on their side. And so now some people have consciences that are so adaptable that they're able just to toss that overboard immediately and say the
Hmm.
exact opposite of what they said yesterday. And we've seen a lot of that. But
Sure.
you also have people who really do believe what they're saying, and they're not simply trying to raise money or build a platform, for whom, when they have already thought this through, it's very difficult for them simply to morph into something else.
Yeah, I think he's got a real problem here. He created this beast, he fed this beast, they all did. And now they're trying to tell MAGA that the beast doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And, there was a promise of, put me back in the White House and give us Congress, and we will go after that deep state cabal of baby blood drinking, child grooming, rich, powerful, elitist Democrat pedophiles. And now there's no reason for him not to deliver on that promise. And MAGA's asking why. And
Hmm.
there are people peeling off. I've spoken to them. They are peeling off because of this. And he's between a rock and a hard place. He can't not release the files. And as many believe, he can't release them because either it incriminates him on some level, and or it incriminates a lot of very rich, powerful cronies of his. It's a problem.
Yeah, and I think what's really going to um, show what's happening here in terms of the country is going to be whether that persists. I mean, if you think about Watergate, for instance, that language that came into the American vernacular of stonewalling, the idea that the White House at that time had was, if we just stonewall this and don't yield at all, eventually people will move on. And I think that if Watergate were happening now, that would probably be true.
Mm.
So I think we'll have to. The question will be: is this still the case in January? And if so, yeah, I think we're at a place where justice probably will come to light. If
Mhm.
we've if we've if we've moved on the way we have about, and there's so many things right now that when we think about something that happened a month ago, we think that seems like 3 years ago. I mean, I haven't even.
Yeah.
There's just so much that has happened. I
No,
haven't even
no.
thought
What
about that.
happened? What happened over the weekend? What happened last
Right?
Friday? Like it's exhausting.
Yeah.
The Epstein situation or the Epstein divide is to me the greatest example of good versus evil this country has seen in several decades. You agree?
Well, I think that certainly, I'm not sure that the response to it necessarily has been that way. I think certainly the facts of the case, as we know them, even apart from what we don't know and what we want to know, clearly is in that category. Yeah,
You know,
and,
it,
and,
it
and I think that's one of the reasons why, if you look at, um, I mean, there is a sense of the harming of people at the sexual level, the trafficking of people, the harming particularly of children and of minors, that consciences can steel themselves to, but only for so long. I mean, I think of Fenton O'Toole has a what he calls a biography of Ireland, where he's talking about what happened, among other things, but with the credibility of the church there on child sex abuse victims. And he talked about the fact that for a long time there would be parents who would bring their minor child to apologize to the priest who abused that child,
mm,
until ultimately they started to realize, wait, no, this is wrong. And the church that is saying to me there is an objective standard of morality to which we are called is not living up to that.
mhm.
And there was a massive break that seemed to happen very suddenly, but conscience has started to wake up. I think that does happen.
Sometimes when we see and experience things like this, folks tend to overcomplicate things. And it really is very simple. When I was watching that press conference a couple of weeks ago with the survivors and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ro Khanna and the other congressman, I forget his name.
Thomas Massey.
Yeah, I just said to myself, let's keep this simple. You are either for the rape of teenage girls or you're not. If you're not, we know what we all have to do then, right? And if you are, you do what you're doing right now, which is nothing. So
yeah, because in the case of these Epstein files, the argument is not, is there something there or is there not anything there? I mean, we all know there's something there with him. The question is whether that's going to be seen or not.
Right.
I mean, that's the fundamental question. I think that's one of the reasons why the debate is as weird as it is, because there's actually, the question is not, should we hold whoever this list of names are accountable? We need to do something about John Smith and his. That's not what the debate is right now. The debate is who was involved in this, and then move to the question of whether or not they should be held accountable. And so right now the argument is whether or not that should be even addressed or even seen.
Right.
And again, I've seen that before. I've seen that in a church context where there were people who would say, if we deal with this, it's going to distract us. And it's going to distract us. And my response to that is to say, distract you from what? If you can't maintain justice for the most vulnerable people in a society, then what is the point?
Well, the flip side of that is it's being done this way to protect the most powerful in society.
Yeah.
And that's just really unconscionable.
Yeah. And it also, I mean, even apart from this particular moral question, once you have a society that starts to decide that justice only works toward people who don't have the resources to escape it, you don't have a system of justice anymore. Some really, really bad things start to happen at that point. And so it's important for justice in this case for those things to be made public. It also is important for justice generally for them to be.
At the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing yesterday, FBI Director Kash Patel said that based on the information and the files they have, Jeffrey Epstein did not traffic teenage girls to anyone but himself. Are you satisfied with that?
No, because I think if that's true, we should see the documentation that says that.
Right.
And I think
that would be the easy thing, right?
It's an easy thing to do, and it's an easy thing to do also to redact the names of victims. There are so many ways that this has been done in other contexts of predatory behavior, where victims are protected while predators are not. And in this case, what we have seen is a large number, as you mentioned with the press conference, a large number of survivors who have voluntarily come forward. And that's a very, very difficult thing. And when I was watching that press conference, one of the things I immediately thought of is how many survivors of sexual abuse I have dealt with in a religious context whose lives have been completely destroyed over time. And it took an extraordinary amount of courage to say, and they weren't even dealing with people as powerful as allegedly this list would be. That takes an extraordinary amount of courage to say, I'm going to speak to this.
Yeah, and an hour later, the United States president said it was a Democratic hoax. So when we all ask each other, like, why don't women come forward after sexual abuse? Just think for a second that they are living in a country where the most powerful human on earth doesn't believe them, doesn't listen to them.
Well, and I've seen survivors in other contexts who have been hounded. It lost their jobs, lost their
Hmm.
incomes, lost all kinds of other things simply because they said what happened to them, and
Hmm.
that ultimately, in any context, ultimately cannot help but have a chilling effect,
Hmm.
which is, I think, the point.
You ended your op-ed with the following quote, "Whoever the victims are, they will be heard. Whoever those who harmed them are, they will be found out. The Epstein files may never be opened on earth, but do not be deceived. They are open in heaven." I mean, that sounds like you don't believe we're ever going to get to the bottom of this scandal and that people will ultimately be held accountable for these heinous crimes.
Well, I don't know if they will be in the course of our lifetimes. What I do know, though, I mean, I'm a believing Christian. I believe that Jesus was correct when he said, "There's nothing that is hidden that will not be exposed. There's nothing that is in darkness that will not be brought to light." So I do believe that there is an ultimate reckoning. So even those who think, well, somehow I'm going to be able to escape accountability for my actions, I do not believe ultimately that's true.
Let's turn to religion. And I'm going to ask you this question as a atheist.
Hmm.
Um, what is the significance of faith and religion in so many American lives? What does it bring people?
Well, I think for one thing is it answers a longing present um, in their lives and consciences that makes sense of their lives. I mean, think of C.S. Lewis, who described himself as the most reluctant convert in all of England at the time, who had been an atheist, and who talked about he spoke of it as joy, but he meant it in a specific kind of way, the kind of almost aching longing for something outside of oneself, which he found to be true in the revelation of God in Jesus Christ. I think that there are many people who are convinced that this is actually true, that there is more to life than simply what we can see or know. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is that um, you have people who are also, and this is the second step, brought into a community with other people. And in the case of Christianity, a community that transcends time and space. I belong to an actual body of people, living and dead, to whom I belong. I think
Hmm.
that there's a great there's an answering of a lot of questions with that step and that move toward faith.
Unfortunately, today, religion, though, is often being used to divide and legitimize truly awful behavior. And it certainly fuels partisan tribalism and toxicity. How did we get there?
Well, I think in one sense, the United States for a long time was more of an exception to the history of the world than than we are right now, because there has always been um, the the attempt by authoritarians or gurus or anybody else to use religion as a means to an end, because once you're able to say, if you disagree with me and if you oppose me, you're not just opposing me, you're opposing God, or the gods. That has a great deal of power.
Hmm.
The ironic thing is that this is one of the things that the Hebrew and Christian scriptures are warning about constantly and giving demonstrations of how this can be done and how it ought to be opposed. So that has happened throughout the history of the world. I think that we're at a moment right now where the problem is you have that kind of a use of religion as a means to an end in many contexts that requires those of us who really believe to say it's not just that this is bad for democracy, although it is, it's that it also is a repudiation of the faith itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sometimes what is happening is that you have people who will say, well, the problem is that people believe too much, when in reality, the problem is that they believe too little. So that in many cases, what's happening with these religions is the replacement of the politics uh, as the as the defining driving force. So, for example, um, several years ago, in a lot of communities around the country, there was this move to ban mosques or to use the levers of the city council or the board of supervisors or somebody else to zone mosques out of existence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, somebody might make that argument with some sort of worldview, but you can't as a conversionist Christian. Because if you really believe that no one can come before God unless he or she is born again, then the state can't issue that as the way that it does a driver's license. So banning mosques in that sense is not just a repudiation of the First Amendment, although it clearly is that. It also is a repudiation of the Christian gospel because it's saying that you can have pretend Christians and that's just as good. Well, that is just as good if all you want is a society that is Christian as a substitute for ethnic identity or blood and soil or something like that. That's not that's not for people who believe historic apostolic Christianity. That can never be enough.
Yeah. Well, let's continue with this theme of what I consider hypocrisy. How do you explain the relationship between Donald Trump and the evangelicals? I mean, like, I'm not sure who's using who, but it certainly runs counter to core Christian values of humility, compassion, and truth.
Well, I mean, obviously that's my point of view, but let me explain um, why you would have different categories of people who are supportive of Mr. Trump. For some of them, Trump is what Trumpism, at least, is what they have been wanting all along. That's clearly true. And there are some who will use language that will say, for instance, uh, we're at a time right now where things are so bad that we have to toss aside all of the old moral norms and civil rules and everything else. And as they might say, go on offense and play hardball. There are some who are like that. There are others though who reluctantly went along with this, but we're in the sort of situation now. One of the things that I said in 2016, when I would have people who would say, I don't like this, and this, and this, but I do agree with him on abortion, and I do too. I agree with him on judges. I do too. Um, and so I'm going to support him on those things, and I'm going to oppose him on these other things. And I said to myself at the time, I just don't believe it because
Hmm.
that's not the way that American life works right now.
Right.
People who will say, I'm I'm with you here, and I'm going to come against you and hold you accountable right here. I mean, that's why we're so stunned by Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey and the
Right.
few people who actually are. It almost never happens
Hmm.
in American life, and so I have seen with many people who initially were very reluctant, the partisan totalization has its has its work ultimately, and we start to flip around and just adapt ourselves to our political leaders and tribal leaders.
Mm. In the age of Trump this past decade, religion and cultism for many have morphed into one. I used to think Trumpism was a cult. And a little while ago, I started to believe it really, to me, resembles more of a religion. He's treated in a godly manner. He's called the chosen one. People claim that he's been sent here from God. Do you think Trump has become, in effect, an idol within parts of the evangelical community, replacing Christ as the central figure of allegiance? I mean, that's kind of what it feels like. It looks like.
I think in some sectors, yes, but I think the picture is more complicated than that. So often, what we see happening is that you will have in congregations or in families or in friend groups, even people who vote the same way, for whom that is the question, whether the political affiliation is the defining factor of my existence. So, for instance, I spoke one day probably within 24 hours to a very conservative red state Bible church evangelical pastor, and with a very progressive blue state Episcopal priest. Both of them were serving in congregations where everybody pretty much voted the same way. Everybody in the one voted for Trump, everybody in the other voted for, at that time it was Biden before. They all had voted the same way. They all had more or less the same political ideas and convictions, but the congregations were a tinderbox, not over red versus blue, but over what is going to be central in that congregation. That was the fundamental problem, and I see a lot of that right now. So I think it actually does become more complex the further down we drill into it.
How dangerous do you believe the rise of Christian nationalism is to both democracy and authentic Christianity?
I think it's very dangerous, but um, I think it has to be defined correctly and rightly. So one of the things I would say to my secular, non-religious friends is that there's a reason why the boy who cried wolf is a cliche. It's because it does hit at something that's really true. And so there are some people who will say, well, Christian nationalism is anyone whose consciences their consciences are informed by what they believe from Christianity. Well, I mean that's Martin Luther King. That's that's every significant moral movement in the country. That's not Christian nationalism. What Christian nationalism is to use the symbols and the tropes of Christianity as a means toward ethno nationalism. And we're seeing this all over the world. I mean, there's
Hmm.
a really important scholar by the name of Tobias Kramer, who um, looked at these movements in Europe. Where you will have people who are leading Christian sorts of movements who are atheists, but what they will say is, well, we're we're using Joan of Arc in France in order to make the point that we want to be French and not Muslim or Jewish. We
Hmm.
want to be Dutch. We're using this cross and not these other things. Well, that's not the religion. That's the use of the religion. And so that's dangerous. That's dangerous for any democracy or any republic. It's also deadly dangerous for Christianity. I mean, every time that's been attempted, you end up hollowing out Christianity, and it's tossed aside like a husk
Mm,
because it's incompatible. You can't put together the message that Jesus has given of internal transformation, along with the way that Jesus teaches. It's not just the what you're trying to accomplish; it's also the how of how you get there.
mm.
Once you just sever all of that up, you end up with something that is completely different than Christianity.
Yeah, well, we continue to see a shift by more and more Americans away from religion. I mean, the share of atheists or nons, as they're more commonly known these days, is larger than any individual religious group. So, why do you think that is beyond what you just stated?
Well, I think what we have seen over the past couple of years is a stabilizing of that. And so I think there were some people who assumed there's going to be secularization at a constant rapidity that will ultimately just do away with religion. There's been a stabilization of that over the past several years. Um, so it's going to, I think we're really going to see over the next decade or so what this is going to look like in American life. It also is really complex once you come in and you start to ask, well, what does no religious affiliation actually mean in an American context? And it doesn't really look like Sweden. It looks like something very different. Now, I'm concerned about that because I think if you come back to the worst of both possible worlds, one of the worst things that you can possibly have is somebody who is believing himself or herself to be a Christian, but who has no community and is not connected to the church and to other people. You can get a very dangerous sort of mix there. So I don't know exactly what this is going to look like, but what we have seen is there is a melting down of almost every institution in American life. There was a study I saw several years ago that was looking at what happened when you had the loss of labor unions in what is traditionally left coded, and the loss of church going in what's traditionally right coded. And what you end up with is often ideology without connection, without community at all. That's not good for anybody.
Yeah, there's that famous scene in Annie Hall where Woody Allen is standing on line with Diane Keaton or date, and somebody behind him is talking about
Marshall
Marshall
McLuhan.
McLuhan. Yeah,
Hmm.
and he's like, "Well, Marshall McLuhan this, Marshall McLuhan that," and then
Yeah.
Woody Allen says, "Well, I happen to have Marshall McLuhan right here with me," and then Marshall McLuhan says, "Sir, you know nothing of my work." So that leads to my last question, which is, were he here today, hearing about everybody using his name and invoking his, like, I mean, I get the worst names called to me online, things I haven't even never even words I've never heard before, and
Yeah.
just for shits and giggles, I always go to the bios, and inevitably the first words in someone's bio is loves Jesus or loves God.
Mhm.
Um, were he here today, what do you believe Jesus Christ might say about today's Christianity?
Well, I think he is here today,
Ah,
present
good
through
answer.
his spirit, and I think that what you would see is the fact that this is not some unexpected development. It's exactly what he was warning about from day one. I mean, the first The first, if you actually read the New Testament, throughout it, there is the refrain, stop using the name of Jesus as justification for unJesus-like things. Most of the Pauline epistles are doing that. And the first extended words that we have from the resurrected Christ in the book of Revelation is absolutely knocking the chops of churches that were doing just that from Jesus himself. And in many cases, one of the things that he said and said to his disciples is, I'm telling you that all of these things will happen, that there will be people who will use my name for horrific purposes, so that you will not be surprised when it does. Which means you have to, for those of us who are Christians, we have to be watchful of that and to oppose it. We also need to recognize that that the response to it is not hardened cynicism, but continued moving forward and bearing witness.
So would he pull a Marshall McLuhan and look at a lot of today's Christians and say, you know nothing of my work?
Yeah, I mean, he said that he will do that. You never knew me.
Russell, great conversation. I hope you'll come back and continue the chat with me.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
All righty. Take care.